Hello everyone, good evening. Welcome back to the channel. I hope everyone is doing really well. And we just completed the first section on server.port property in Spring Boot internals playlist. I hope you liked the video. We discussed all the possible configurations and we also started the application at different ports and found out how the application behaves. Please do mention what you thought about the video and also like and support the channel by subscribing to the channel. And today's discussion, we are going to have a quick introduction to dispatcher servlet and Spring. Now, this particular video is going to be a bit more towards the technical aspect. We are not going to see the code in today's session. We are just going to brush up the concept a bit so that we understand what dispatcher servlet is. Sorry, what dispatcher servlet is. Because in the next lectures, we are going to go across and find out few things about Spring Boot, and this concept of dispatcher servlet is going to help us more understand the Spring Boot internals in details. So before going there, we need to know what dispatcher servlet is. Now, some of you might be coming from Spring Boot background and might know dispatcher what dispatcher servlet is, but it's also a good, this particular video is also a good way to remember it for your future. Okay, so the way I'm going to discuss dispatcher servlet, you might be able to remember it for a longer period of time. Okay, so let's start the today's discussion. Okay, so dispatcher servlet. Now, when I say dispatcher servlet, someone will say front controller design pattern. Someone will say it's something that you configure in web.xml. Some will say it's not present in Spring Boot. Some will say it is present in Spring Boot. Some will say how it is working when it is not present. So let's keep all those things aside for the next video. Okay, we'll just focus, basically we are keeping the questions aside for the next video. We are just focusing on dispatcher servlet, what it is. Okay, and how do you basically understand what dispatcher servlet does, how do you see that in any application. Okay, so we'll start our discussion by considering your home. I'm not even calling it your house, I'm just saying that to imagine the start of our discussion as a home, as your home. So in your home, let's consider currently you have only one entrance and there are multiple rooms. Okay, so whenever you want to go inside one of the rooms and when you're coming from outside, so first door that you will go through is the entrance door or the door to your living room. So from your living room you will go to other rooms that are present in your home. If your home is a multi-story home, then some rooms will be on the next floor, some will be on the ground floor. You may recognize some certain rooms by the size they are, like the biggest room or the smallest room. Or maybe you will recognize some of the rooms and have the discussion around them whenever you are saying in which room you are going, by saying, okay, I'm going to the guest room, I'm going to the kids room, I'm going to the bedroom. So these are the different rooms that you are being allowed access to, or these are the doors. There were doors to your room by which you will be accessing those rooms. And secondly, to access all these rooms within your home, you are going to enter from the main entrance door. Okay, so now taking this concept, and once you have understood that all the internal rooms within your home are kind of being controlled or are present behind the entrance door. Okay, now let's take the same concept and go to the applications, web applications. So when you do this www.google.com, it basically calls a get API. So we'll also see what these APIs are when we go deep into the Spring Boot internals tutorials. We'll see request mapping, get mapping, post mapping, all those sort of things. But basically, when you do www.google.com, you are requesting on the Chrome or whatever browser you are, that please go and get me this particular website. So you're trying to get this information, www.google.com. Or maybe when you go and click on sign in on LinkedIn website, so it sends a request which looks something like this, where www.linkedin.com US login, and there is some other details which we can ignore for now. We'll just focus on the main part of it, wherein it's sending a secured www.linkedin.com request on the login API, which is within the US. Okay, which is within the US. path. Maybe we can say US is the path, us/login is the path on linkedin.com, and the request method is get, and the status code returned was 200. Similarly, when you click on sign up on the same LinkedIn website, it takes you to through the path signups cold join question mark, and there is some extra detail that is there. Again, the request method is get. Okay, so what happens is when you do a get API call, in our instance, we have just seen the get API call. So I'll just go ahead with it. So what happens when you do a get API call? So the get API call reaches the server, it reaches the US microservice, or it reaches the login microservice. You can say it's either of those, and there will be a controller. Okay, so in MVC we use at the rate rest controller annotation, on in Spring Boot we use at the rate rest controller annotations. Also discuss about them and the differences between them at a later on video. But these are all Java classes which are annotated with these particular annotations, and they have the methods associated with the request mapping that we have given. For example, login, or maybe maybe a cold join is one of the request method that is there. In case we are just saying maybe sign up one and cold join, this particular path might not be present on the server, so we often get this 404 not found issues. Maybe I'm doing one login or some other random values wherein the request path is not correct and it's not present on your server, which is there is no at the rate rest controller or controller return which is having this particular request being, which has this particular method to which the request can be mapped to. So we often see this 404 not found, but for not found error message. We can also customize this error message, and in Spring Boot there is a way that we can also not throw this 404 404 not found exception, or basically an error code. Okay, but this we will also discuss when we are going ahead and doing the rest advice or rest controller exception handling. The way this works is by the name we call as front controller design pattern, also known as dispatcher servlet in Spring. So now the endpoint us/login, okay, this can be present in different applications, or they can be present in the same application. Login and cold join become the internal rooms of your home, and sign up and the US becomes the entrance to your application, both of them. So there is also possibility to have multiple dispatcher servlets in the same application, or you can have single dispatcher servlet in an application. It's all about configuration. With Spring MVC we configure it in the web.xml. We'll see how it works in Spring Boot. Now, how dispatcher servlet works is this US path from the request mapping will be where the dispatcher servlet will be configured, or it could be configured to the first slash that is there in your request. And within this, the dispatcher servlet decides that the next path that the request wants to access is login, and whether it has any particular request method where it can map that request to. If not, it will return 404. If yes, it will send the request with the body to that particular method, which will be a Java code. In our case, we are going to go with Java Spring Boot microservices, so it will be a Java code and the request will be received. So the entire architecture looks something like this. We get an incoming request front controller. This is from the MVC pattern. Okay, so it decides the model, read the response, all those things are happening. But let's just look at it at some. We'll just use some of the details here and not have a lot of lot of discussion on this. Else we will deep dive into the MVC part of things. We're just looking at the front controller. So we'll get the request. It will see if there is a actual method that is correspondingly present in the controller. If yes, it will delegate the request to the controller, and the controller will handle the request and it will give back the response. So this is how the dispatcher servlet works. You can imagine it as different rooms in your homes. You always enter from the main door, and if the rooms are there, you are able to access it. If not, you are not able to access it. If you, for reaching the a room of your home, you need to define the path which starts from the main entrance door and it ends at the room's address, or the room's the doors room of that particular door. Okay, so this is what a dispatcher servlet is. Conventionally, we also configure. We used to configure multiple filters, servlet context, and other things around the dispatcher servlet with Spring MVC. With Spring Boot, all these things have been automated or pre-configured for us. In the next session, we will see how Spring Boot microservices work and whether do we have dispatcher servlet or not, and if yes, then how to see it, how to configure it, and all those other details we will go ahead and see in the next session. So this was just an introduction session on dispatcher servlet, so that when we go into details of dispatcher servlet and have a discussion on dispatcher servlet with Spring Boot, we don't start on a blank slate. We have some context for what is being discussed, and it will be an important point to know when you are coming from Spring MVC. If you don't have that knowledge of Spring Boot and Spring MVC, so basically dispatcher servlet is the person who determines where to map the request to in your Java code. If there is no particular mapping found, it will give you a 404. If there is a corresponding method in your controller or at the rate rest controller, it will take your request to that particular method, and you can do your entire business logic there and return the response. In our case, we saw examples of www.google.com, linkedin.com, and another linkedin.com example with login. Okay, so that's all for today's session. We'll continue having the discussion on dispatcher servlet with Spring Boot in the next session. Thank you everyone for joining. Thanks a lot.